can I welcome to the stage two speakers who are, in a way, following on from some of those themes, which is to do with, although young people don't predominantly play games, they are the next generation. Do join the stage. Walking on the stage is Dr Maggie Atkinson and Baroness Beeban Kidron, and they're going to talk about iRights. Now, I'll let them talk to you about this. I'll just do a brief introduction. So on my immediate right is Beeban Kidron. She's well known as a British filmmaker. She spent the last 30 years working in feature film, documentary and television. And she's co-director of Cross Street Films. She founded in 2006 the educational charity Into Film, and that set up over 800 film clubs across the UK. She's a trustee of many charities, and she's a patron of Law Action Worldwide and president of Voluntary Arts, and she was appointed to the Lords in 2012. But the thing that she's come to talk about today is our iRights. It's a campaign to adopt the rights-based approach to children, young people, online. And there are 5 iRights providing a common framework by which government, corporations, adults and young people under 18 would design, deliver and consume digital technologies. To talk about this with her is Dr Maggie Atkinson, who's been Children's Commissioner for England since March 2010. She's the second post holder in this vital role. She's had 35 years working with and for children and young people, and she's led the Office of the Children's Commissioner in a period when we know from the horrific stories that have been developing that the influence needs to continue to increase and lead to positive change, particularly for children who are vulnerable or marginalised. She was the first Director of Children's Services for Gateshead during the radical changes for the Children's Act in 2004. So, of course, she's keenly interested in the work that Beeban is doing around this iRights campaign. If you're nearer the back, perhaps you wanted to come to the front. But this probably is one of the key issues about, do children know their rights? Are their rights being taken away from them? What rights should we be fighting for on their behalf? Or do we just leave it to their own devices? So can I pass over to you, Maggie and Beeban? Thank you.
Thanks, Jude. And Beeban, very, very welcome to this conversation. I hope it's going to be a lively one. We may well open to questions and answers from the floor as the session goes on. We're only here for half an hour, so I'm just going to crack on, really. Beeban and I have talked before. My role is about the rights of the child very broadly and very generally. And there are 4 commissioners in the UK, and we've all agreed that Beeban's work on this is vital. So I'm going to ask Beeban a first question, really, which is, why do we value and why do we so highly rate the web?
Well, I think that none of us who saw the birth of the web could have imagined what a phenomenal and what a phenomenal role it was going to take in our lives, and that it's actually become the organizing technology of society. There's very little that we now do that doesn't interact with the web in some way. And I think that as someone who's spent most of my life as a filmmaker, communication technology of this strength is overwhelmingly exciting. What happened, though, was it was not necessarily designed with all its users in mind. And that's the conversation that iRights is trying to fill. But speaking personally, I'm a user, I'm a lover, I'm an absolute fan of certain aspects of the technology. And I would say that all of the criticisms that I might have either personally or the coalition that I represent here are not about the technology itself. It's about some of the ways in which we are beginning to use it and some of the dominant culture around that technology. So I think we have to, first of all, separate out, love, hate the technology. We love the technology. Now what do we want it to do for us?
So one of the things that people often tell me, and I'm sure they tell you, is that children, young people, kids who've been born since the web came into being, are somehow born native, born at ease, likely to be in control, likely to be the people who make it do what needs to be done. Your materials, as far as I've seen them, ask a big question about how in control they really are. Do you want to explore some of the reservations with us that led you to believe that we need a different approach for young people?
Yeah, I think that this idea of the digital native was one that I think that when I first started looking at this issue, I think I bought into that idea. You know, the idea of the kid with two fast thumbs in the bedroom tweeting, taking down an autocratic regime from the bedroom, building $1 billion company. You know, that's sort of the idea we have. We have the idea that, adults, parents, teachers are no good at this. Kids are fantastic. Well, actually, that's not quite true. And astoundingly, it's less and less true. It is increasingly the case that young people are on the lowest rung of what we call the digital opportunity ladder. And if you look, if anyone's interested, you can look at the EU Online research that they've been gathering for a decade or more. And it is absolutely astounding that kids are stuck on the first ladder and they're not accessing even the things that people my age who engage with the net are finding there. And they're not the creators, and they're not the users of the open bits of the net. They're very, very stuck in commercial spots. They're very curtailed in what they can and are able to do, and they're not really getting out there. So the idea that you can speak to anybody across the world, find anything in an instant, have a friend at distance, is actually not the reality of most young people's lives.
One of the things that your materials argue is that children of any generation, the under 18s, are actually more rather than less manipulated by the monsters of the web, or by the holders of the power on the web, or by commercial interests. Do you want to just walk us into that bit of the territory? Because it can be quite contentious, can't it?
It can, and in fact one of the rights that we talk about is the right to agency, which is the right to informed and conscious use of the net. And I think that one of the things that we have to explore now is what the purpose is, what the syntax, what the language of the design of the net does to people. And in fact, that it is very clear that all of us, and this is not exclusive to young people, but I will make a case about why we have to care on behalf of young people. But all of us are not really aware about the level of manipulation that goes on, the design of the algorithms. And actually, when I was last at the Southbank, Tim Berners-Lee said something rather wonderful. He said, attention is the gold of the internet. That's where the money is. By having our attention, that is how they build, that's the business model. So if attention is the gold, then what we have to do is grab the attention. And if young people in particular have their attention on the net for the sake of someone's business purposes, then they are being manipulated. Now, I am not against them using the net, and I'm not even that strong about where I feel they should or should not go. I do, however, feel that they need to know what the purposes of the technology are, and that their attention has value. And in that value exchange, we have to make sure they're getting a good deal.
So is what you're saying that actually they're not savvy enough to know that they're being manipulated? As I'm very old, I'm desperately old. My granddad used to walk me into the main central library in the city where we lived and say, you can go anywhere in the world from here without leaving this spot, but you have to understand how to use it and what to believe and what to disbelieve and how to do both. Yeah. Are you saying that kids don't get that on the web?
Well, I was going to sort of argue with this idea of savvy. I think kids are very savvy, but one of the things that's quite interesting is that if you look at the percentile of kids who feel that they are safe and have good safety outcomes on the net, it is actually in the 90th percentile. But actually, when you talk to them about how upset they are, it's actually sort of 90 percentile also that they're upset. So safe, upset, and so on. This idea of savvy, what does savvy mean on the net? Can they get quicker to where they want to go? Can they make a phone call faster? There's one kind of savvy, but I think that word conjures up the digital native thing again. I think, do any of us really understand the purposes and technology of the net. And I think that the best way I have of explaining when I had my moment of understanding was when I went to see Louis von Ahn. And he's a very brilliant man, and at the age of 22, he invented something called CAPTCHA. And we all knowingly or unknowingly use CAPTCHA. It's the box that you have to type in the letters that you see, you know, for security purposes to say you're human. And he had a really fantastic site that was actually translating, using crowd computing, using us to translate Wiki into 5 different languages. Absolutely brilliant. And how he did it, the mechanism was that he taught for free Spanish, French, German, Portuguese, and as you learned your lessons, you were inadvertently translating the web. Now, that was a marvelous thing, and I was so sort of awe-inspired. And when you say, what do I love about the web? I love that, right? But in the conversation that I had, he somehow managed to let me know that he knew from his users how old they were, what their first language was, when they left school, etc., etc. And by the time I had come out of that room, he said, we are doing micro experiments on millions of people every second of every day to see if you respond better to a gold star here, a silver star here, this color blue, that word there. We know how you will behave, and we know how to make you behave differently. And at the point at which he says, we know how to make you behave differently, I said, how widespread is this? And he laughed at me. And he said, every commercial place on the net, this is what we do. We are masters of gaining your attention. Now, I don't think that that's some sort of terrible 1984 scenario, but I do think we have to understand that that is why we get that urgent need to text, that we get that urgent need to send ourselves an email because we haven't got one in the last 20 minutes. That's why kids are now waking up in the middle of the night to check their phone. That is not an accident, that is by design. And at that point, you have to ask whether someone who is under 18, who is not yet mature, who actually is in a developmental stage of behavior, so what they learn now becomes what they do later, whether that is a fair equation, or at the very least, should they know that's what's happening? And I say yes.
I would agree that they ought to know that's what's happening. I like to know when I'm being manipulated, and I think we should teach our children to understand it as well, but then I used to be a teacher. Can you talk us very briefly, Beeban, through the 5 rights?
Yeah.
So that people know what the territory is that they'd be signing up to if they became a pledger.
A pledger. Yeah, the iRights, really the iRights are designed to be a framework. So a lot of people who have signed up have actually sent a very nice message to us afterwards, and they say, you know, what we love about this is that before we were searching to find out what good looked like, and this is an expression of good. It's not the only expression of good, it's not the final expression of good, it's probably an iteration of what good eventually might look like by the time this has had an awful lot of air and input. And I should say right now that there were about 200 organizations that represent millions and millions of people and kids in civil society who have worked on the rights, so it's not something that I wrote in my bedroom. So the 5 rights are, first of all, the right to remove what you yourself put up. You know, childhood is an age of transition. Teenagehood is a moment where your peers are more important than other contexts. You may put something up that you then wish to move away from. The idea that you can reinvent yourself. And so the right to remove, not to be confused with the European right to remove, is that if you are under 18, you have put something up that you have the opportunity to remove it, not only from your record, but from your footprint, and that would be available. It does not extend to what people write about you, and we do have some ideas around that, but the right to remove is specifically for what you put up. The right to know, and this is actually both in terms and conditions, you know, the idea that some young child is going to go through 30,000 words, pages and pages, and read this legalistic thing, is absolutely ludicrous. But the right to know actually goes beyond that. That terms and conditions, the way your visibility, where you're using the net, should be understood by the average user. And if the average user is 14, it should be understood by someone under 14. So, for example, we're just currently designing our website, and so when you fill in your name, it says, you know, you're really welcome, we do want under 18s, but if you're under 18, you know, you have to know that we're going to share this, your name, with all the other people in our coalition. We won't share your email address, but we will say your name. So if you don't want anyone to know, please don't put your surname. That's a very, very simple way of dealing with a right to know. And we have also made it technically possible that should they wish to remove their name, they can, because they can change their mind because they are a minor. So this, in complex situations, has very complex ramifications. But the principle is that if someone's under 18, they have the right to know whether you're selling, sharing, keeping in perpetuity, using for other purposes that you have not yet invented, that they have the right to know that those things are going on. And I spend a lot of time with kids in schools, and it always makes them laugh when I say, you know, you might actually want people to know what your favorite kind of trainer is, but you may not want them to know you searched for anal warts. And they always fall about laughing, but they get the point. The right to know and the right, therefore, to have elective choice over what is known about you. The right to be safe and comfortable is pretty self-evident, but the idea of comfort and the idea of not just dealing with children and safety issues as a legalistic, what is illegal, well, what do you do about all the other upsets that are not illegal, and the idea that they have somewhere to go. You know, in the analog world, if you like, you know, we have all sorts of strategies about how to deal age appropriately, and it has to be said that one child's, you know, freedom is another child's oppression, but but curtailing all children, you know, is not the answer. And so the idea of introducing the idea of comfort is also about resilience and learning and creating an understanding of how you might behave and how you might protect your own behavior in that space. And there's a lot of good work going on, but one of the things that we would argue is that the work around kids is all happening in different spaces. And what we need is a holistic and a rights-based approach that deals with kids overall, their interactions on the net. The fourth one kind of goes back to your other point. It is the right to agency, the right to conscious and informed use of the net. And so understanding what it is that's being done. And there are some fantastic people, and particularly some of you were in the games session earlier. You know, there's some fantastic games companies that say, time for a break. Walk around the block, don't get stuck in, don't get attached. There's other things about, you know, very good practice about clocks. How long do you want to be on? How many times do you want to check your Facebook account today? And there's some fantastic work coming out of MIT with some guys, which I don't think is going to go on general release, but they were working out how to, when they checked their Facebook, they worked out how to rig their computer so it gave them an electric shock, because they, MIT students, found, you know, in the media lab, found that they were spending too much of their time being distracted by their own social media. So it was actually fantastic to be talking to people at the heart of the matter and them looking for strategies. So that's something that we're talking to the tech community and to Mozilla and people like that about how we might manifest this right in some way. And the last one is the right to digital literacy. And again, this is something, you know, we hear a lot about digital literacy, and this is actually both for the young people, but also for their parents and teachers to actually try and find a way of articulating what literacy is in this world. And we believe, and the coalition believe, that literacy is actually about developing new social norms, about understanding social norms, understanding sort of your visibility in different places. It's the whole package. It is also about being a creator, understanding where the creative parts of the net are, how you could be a coder, how you could learn, how to use open software, how to protect yourself and deal with your privacy settings to a degree that you feel comfortable with, etc., etc. So it's literacy in the broadest sense, and actually articulating, as we are beginning to do amongst us as a group, which is an ever-growing group, what we believe literacy is. And I would say a good starter is, in fact, the Mozilla digital literacy sort of agenda that they've got on their website, which deals with, all of these issues in turn. So those are our 5 rights.
It is a brilliant manifesto if you haven't read it. Who are you calling on, Beeban, to join you, to be empowered by this, to be part of what's going on?
Well, I think it's worth saying that, originally, this came very much out of a bunch of people who felt like we cannot go on. There are 2 things wrong about the discussion in this space. One is that it tends to be about protection and freedom, and those binary opposites are not what we need here. So that's the first thing. I think the other thing is that there's a lot of it's too big, the horse has bolted, this is a parent issue, this is a teacher issue, this is a kid issue, oh, we're back to the digital natives again. And I think that's a long answer to your question, which is everyone, yeah? This is a framework by which, we would like to see people design, deliver, and consume the net. This is what we believe is a better net for kids. So if you are a teacher, this is something that you can look at in your practice and see whether you can use the things that observe the rights. If you are a corporate, you could look and see whether you could audit your practice against this framework, And if you are a kid, you can say, am I being treated right according to these rights? I now see what my rights are, and I think that actually this site is doing really well. I don't like how I'm being treated over here, and behave accordingly. So what it is, a bit like the journey we've been on with, let's say, diversity in the boardroom. When I was a young woman, nobody really ever thought about whether white men were in charge. We all knew white men were in charge, yeah? Now, when you sit as a trustee on a board and so on, some people do it brilliantly, some people do it willingly, some people do it badly and unwillingly, but there is not a boardroom in the country at which diversity is not considered. And I think that the iRights movement is very much that. We're saying, consider it, audit yourself against it, act accordingly, promote it, demand it, and that way no one's really off the hook. And it does depend on huge numbers of people. And I would say now, and we haven't even got our website up because we are struggling to make it iRights compatible, and we will by the end of the week, I think. But it is worth saying that, among our signatories, and I don't know, I can't give you the whole list because there are so many, but are UNICEF and Duke of Edinburgh Awards, and Martha Lane Fox and Big Brother Watch, and the Southbank Centre and the Arts Council of Wales and practically every teachers' union, because they see this problem in schools. They see the upset, they see the lack of agency over the technology. And we are, and Mozilla Foundation and Barclays Bank. We are the most insanely broad coalition, but there is one thing that everybody has agreed to do, which is audit themselves and try and live by this framework. And I absolutely would say it doesn't answer all the ills, it really doesn't, and it doesn't attempt to. But actually, if we can grab the middle ground and say, here is something that empowers kids, here is a rights and responsibilities approach to how we deal with this, how we think about this, then actually it gives people a little bit more time at the extremities to worry about some of the other stuff, like I know comes up in your sphere of work. It absolutely does. But it does not mean that while, if we leave the debate about the internet to be about pornography and grooming, we let a whole generation, grow up with any kind of support. And I think that I'm of the view, online, offline, what's the bloody difference? It's all one thing. We have, you know, we have the UNCRC, we have rights for children in our legislation. All this is about trying to articulate things that we've already agreed on as a society and put it into this new, young space that was designed by young people, but not necessarily designed for young people.
We have got very few minutes left. I'm going to ask Beeban to say just a little bit about how under 18s have been involved in co-creation, because that part of my business, the UNCRC to which you just referred, is the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which puts them into the heart of the co-creation of the society in which they're growing up and will eventually be adults. And part of what attracts me to this is because it's not adults doing it unto, it's adults doing it with. And I wonder if you can say a little bit about that before we close.
Yeah. Well, right at the beginning, I mean, you Jude referred to something that I did before, which means that I go to a lot of schools. We actually have 8,000 clubs now, Jude. But, you know, and so I spend a lot of time with young people. So this is an issue that I've been called to many, many schools to discuss. I've discussed it with hundreds of young people, and in a way that was my inspiration. Their needs, their articulation of what they wanted to see is very much embodied absolutely in the first step of this. Then one of our coalition signatories is Girl Guiding, and they have had a bunch of girl guides have actually written their own young person's manifesto that is a mirror of these 5 rights put in language so that other young people can understand it. And then we've been working with all sorts of organizations that deal with tech and young people, from freeformers to co-club, et cetera, and all of their networks are looking at this. We do have ambitious plans to have a youth commission on this, and at the moment we're looking for young people who might be at the core of that, so that actually once it's up and running and once we have many, many more signatories, that actually the young people get to really, you know, give it a going over in public and come out with something that is, you know, more engineered by them. And again, Mozilla are looking at making some of our work practical and easier to help people be compatible. And they're also working with young people to say, where are you when you would like to know this information? Where online are you? Where are you physically? How would it emerge in your world in a way that it would be a serious thing for you?
What you guys don't know is that there is a traffic light system on this stage, and it's just gone red, which means that we're about to disappear in a puff of pantomime green smoke if we don't get off the stage within about 30 seconds. You've had a very, very quick flavour of both the powerhouse that is this woman on my left, but also the absolute commitment that she and the coalition of organisations have shown to doing something with children and young people about their safety as well as their power on the net. I do hope that when the website's live, you will go on and you, like me as an individual, although statutorily I can't, that you as an individual will become a coalition member, because it's their net and it's their world, and it's really important that this works. I want to see it in all the real manifestos for next May. Please will you thank Beeban Kidron